The world knew Lemmy Kilmister as an indestructible rock god. When he stepped on stage, raising his Rickenbacker bass and standing inches from the microphone, tens of thousands of people screamed. But that small hole in his instrument's body held a secret nobody knew. On that dark night in 1974, in a Manchester bar, a gunshot echoed, and Lemmy's life could have ended with a single bullet. But the Rickenbacker stepped in. Metal and wood slowed the bullet, changed its trajectory, and protected Lemmy's heartbeat, protecting rock history itself. After that night, Lemmy made a decision. The bass would never be repaired. The hole would stay. Because it wasn't just damage. It was a memory. It represented a philosophy. It was a symbol of survival and never backing down. First meeting: Rickenbacker and Lemmy's destiny. If you really want to understand this story, please hit that subscribe button and follow us, because what we're about to tell you isn't just an instrument story. It's a survival manifesto. In the early 70s, Lemmy Kilmister hadn't formed his own band yet. He was known as Hawkwind's bass player in England's underground music scene, but he wasn't yet the creator of Motörhead, one of heavy metal's indestructible icons. Back then, Lemmy stopped in front of a music shop window and saw the Rickenbacker 4001 model. Its glossy black body, with its long neck, looked elegant yet dangerous, like a weapon. Most bass players used Fender Precision or jazz bass, but Lemmy was different. He was searching for a different sound. The Rickenbacker's harsh, metallic, almost aggressive tonal quality was exactly what he was looking for. When he bought that instrument, he didn't know yet that with this bass, he'd travel the world for decades, appear before millions of fans, and one day it would save him from death. The Rickenbacker wasn't just a bass for Lemmy. It was part of his identity. When he stepped on stage, he'd raise the bass neck upward, get almost close enough to go inside the microphone, and with that characteristic stance, he'd create one of rock history's most recognizable images. The bass was his extension, his breath, his voice. But the real bond would be formed on that dark night. 1974. That night in Manchester. It was fall of 1974. Hawkwind was on a Northern England tour and was about to play at a small club in Manchester. The concert ended. Adrenaline was still high, and Lemmy slung his bass over his shoulder and headed with the rest of the band to a nearby bar. In those years, bars were a second home for rock musicians. The exhaustion of stage performance would be melted away with alcohol and cigarettes. They'd chat with fans. Sometimes fights would break out, but generally, the night would end safely. But that night was different. Lemmy had settled at a corner table, the Rickenbacker still on his back because he never let his instrument out of his sight. He wouldn't entrust it to others. Even backstage, he'd keep it in its case and wait. The bar was crowded, cigarette smoke rose to the ceiling, and a Led Zeppelin song was playing through the speakers. As Lemmy sipped his Jack Daniels, a few local fans came over. They talked about albums, discussed Hawkwind's future. Everything was normal. Until that man walked in. The man was drunk. Maybe he'd taken cocaine or speed too, because his eyes had turned bloodshot, and his steps were unsteady. He approached the bar, ordered something, but the bartender refused him. The man got angry. He started yelling. Everyone in the bar turned and looked. Lemmy didn't pay attention at first. These kinds of scenes were common in rock bars. But then the man turned and saw Lemmy. Maybe he saw Lemmy's long hair, his leather jacket, the bass on his back, and something triggered in his head. The man walked toward Lemmy and shouted, "Who the hell are you?" Tension. Rising. Birth of a fight. Lemmy tried to stay calm. He wasn't someone who disliked fighting, but he avoided unnecessary violence. "Just a musician, man. Calm down," he said. But the man didn't calm down. On the contrary, he got angrier. Maybe Lemmy's British accent in his voice, or maybe the fact that he carried that rock star air, provoked him even more. The man leaned toward Lemmy's face and cursed, "This ain't your club, you filthy hippie." Lemmy stood up. He wasn't tall, but his presence was powerful. The authority that years later would make thousands of people fall silent when he stepped on stage with Motörhead was already there in that period. "I don't want trouble, just drinking my drink," he said. But the man had lost control. He made a move toward Lemmy, raised his fist. Bar security tried to intervene, but it was hard to move through the crowd. Lemmy backed away, went behind the table, but the man followed him. And then, from inside his jacket, he pulled out a handgun. The bar instantly froze. The music was still playing, but nobody was breathing. Lemmy looked into the man's eyes and understood in that moment. This man could pull the trigger. Drunkenness, anger, and perhaps a deeper fragility in his life made him unpredictable. Lemmy raised his hands. Okay, calm down," he said. But the man had the gun pointed at Lemmy, and his finger was trembling on the trigger. And then, maybe a reflex, maybe an unintentional movement, maybe just fate's cruel twist, the man pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed in every corner of the bar. People screamed, hit the floor. Lemmy was thrown backward and fell to the ground. But pain didn't come. His heartbeat was racing. Adrenaline was at its peak, but the bullet hadn't pierced him. Because the Rickenbacker had stepped in. The bullet and Rickenbacker. Life-saving wood and metal. As Lemmy lay on the floor, he checked his base. There was a small hole in the body on the left side of the lower bout. The bullet had entered the instrument's wooden body, passed under the metal strings, and stopped somewhere inside the body. If the Rickenbacker hadn't been on his back, the bullet could have gone directly into Lemmy's back, maybe his lung or his heart. But the instrument's weight, the wood and metal combination, had slowed the bullet, changed its direction, and protected Lemmy. Security took the gun from the man's hand, and police were called. An ambulance came, but Lemmy wasn't injured. He was just in shock. He took the base in his lap, touched the hole, and for a moment his eyes welled up. This instrument had given him more than just making music. It had saved his life. From that moment on, the Rickenbacker would carry a different meaning for Lemmy. It was no longer just a musical instrument, but a comrade in arms, a protector, a symbol of survival. The next day, Lemmy took his bass to a music repair shop. The technician froze when he saw the hole. "Is this a bullet hole?" he asked. Lemmy nodded. The technician examined the instrument, checked the strings, looked at the electronics. "You're lucky," he said. "The bullet didn't damage the strings or electronics. It just entered the body. I can repair it, fill it in, nobody would even know." But Lemmy shook his head side to side. "No," he said, "the hole stays." The technician was surprised. "But this will lower the instrument's value, ruin its appearance," he said. Lemmy smiled. "No, man, this makes it more valuable. This hole means everything to me. It'll remind me what survival means. It will never be repaired." Philosophy. Why the hole stayed. Lemmy's decision wasn't just emotional. It represented a deeper philosophy. In the rock and roll world, everything tries to look perfect. Shiny instruments, professional stage setup, perfect sound systems. But Lemmy never sought perfection. He was searching for authenticity. He chose to carry his wounds instead of hiding them. The bass with the hole was a reflection of his life philosophy. Falling doesn't matter. Getting up and continuing matters. Getting damaged is natural, but you can turn that damage into a badge of honor. As years passed, the hole in the Rickenbacker became a legend. Fans would try to see the mark on the bass's body in stage photos. Some thought it was just a scratch. Some thought it came from an accident. But those who knew the truth would tell how that hole had saved Lemmy's life. And Lemmy never hid this story. In interviews, when he was asked about his bass, he'd tell about that night in Manchester. "Rickenbacker stopped death for me once," he'd say. "How could I repair it?" From Hawkwind to Motörhead, a journey with the bass. In 1975, Lemmy was fired from Hawkwind. He'd been arrested at the Canadian border for possession of speed, and the band members had decided to let him go. That period was dark days for Lemmy. He'd been separated with Betrayal from the band he'd worked with for years, and his future was uncertain. But the Rickenbacker was still with him. With that bass, Lemmy set out on a new path. He formed Motörhead. "I'm gonna form the loudest band in the world," he'd said, and he did it. In the first rehearsals, first concerts, first album recordings, the Rickenbacker was there. Its hold body, its harsh tone, was part of Lemmy's identity. As Motörhead grew, the Rickenbacker became famous too. In every concert photo, on every album cover, that bass would be visible. When fans thought of Lemmy, they'd imagine him with the bass. The Rickenbacker was no longer just an instrument. It was an icon of heavy metal history. And that bullet hole was a war wound, physical proof of rock and roll's survival story. When the Ace of Spades album came out in 1980, Lemmy was recognized worldwide. The song's opening riff came from the Rickenbacker. That harsh, metallic, almost robotic sound would be etched into heavy metal's DNA. When millions of people heard that sound, they didn't know that the instrument being played had a bullet hole in its body. But Lemmy knew. Every time he played a note, under his fingers wasn't just wood and metal, but a story, a struggle, a victory. Backstage, relationship with the bass. Lemmy was famous for his devotion to his instruments. Most musicians entrust their equipment to roadies. They set it up, they pack it up. But Lemmy was different. He always carried his Rickenbacker himself. He'd take it with him on planes, sleep with it in hotels, put it in a special place on the tour bus. One time, a roadie wanted to touch the bass, and Lemmy yelled at him, "Don't touch it, only I can touch it." This wasn't just a control issue. Lemmy had formed an emotional bond with his instrument, because that bass had saved his life. As years passed, the Rickenbacker wore down. Its paint faded, scratches increased, the wood aged. But Lemmy never got a new one. Technicians said, "Get a new Rickenbacker, this one's too old now." But Lemmy refused. "I'm going to play with this bass until I die," he said. And he really did. When he died in 2015, the Rickenbacker was still with him. At the last concert, in the last recording, in his last breath, that bass was there. The hole's meaning, survival and resistance. The bullet hole in the Rickenbacker was a reminder for Lemmy. Every time he stepped on stage, every time he played a note, that hole was there. And it told him this: life will shoot at you. Maybe a bullet, maybe a betrayal, maybe an illness, but you will survive. Because you're strong, and you won't hide your wounds. You'll carry them. Because those wounds are part of your story. Lemmy's life was a hard life. Drug addiction, alcohol, loneliness, health problems, fights, betrayals. But he never gave up. Like the Rickenbacker, he took hits but stayed standing. And he didn't hide his wounds. On the contrary, he carried them with pride. "I'm not perfect," he'd say, but I'm honest, and that's more valuable. Fans drew inspiration from Lemmy because he was real. He didn't create a fake image, didn't try to look perfect. He put aside the rock star ego and just became Lemmy. A man who stepped on stage with a hold bass, drank Jack Daniels, approached the microphone with his cigarette, spoke ugly truths. And people loved that. Because while everyone was trying to be perfect, Lemmy chose to be authentic. Final concerts. Farewell with the Bass. By 2015, Lemmy had aged. He was 70, cancer had taken over his body, diabetes had weakened him, years of alcohol and drug use had worn down his organs. Doctors said, "You shouldn't go on stage anymore." But Lemmy didn't listen. "Until rock and roll ends, I don't end," he said. On his final tour, the Rickenbacker was still with him. Even lifting the bass was hard now, pressing the strings hurt. But he didn't give up. During one concert, when Lemmy stepped on stage, fans couldn't hold back their tears, because they knew they were seeing him for the last time. Lemmy approached the microphone, cradled the Rickenbacker, and played the first notes. The sound was still powerful, still harsh, still Lemmy. But his body couldn't take it anymore. The concert ended, and Lemmy went backstage. He put the bass down, he was out of breath. A technician asked, "Are you okay?" Lemmy smiled. "As long as the Rickenbacker's with me, I'm always okay," he said. On December 28, 2015, Lemmy died. Just 4 days after his 70th birthday. Cancer had beaten him, but before he died, he held his bass one last time. In the hospital bed, weakened, he touched the Rickenbacker. He put his finger in the bullet hole and smiled. "Still here," he said, "still protecting me." And he closed his eyes. Legacy, the hold bass and rock and roll philosophy. When Lemmy died, the Rickenbacker was placed in a museum. But it wasn't displayed just as an instrument. It was displayed as a symbol of survival, resistance, authenticity. When fans came to the museum, they stood in front of the bass, looked at the bullet hole, and remembered Lemmy. Some cried, some smiled, some just stood in silent respect. Because that hole wasn't damage, it was a legacy. It represented a philosophy. Today, when young musicians hear Lemmy's story, they learn something. Perfection isn't mandatory. Authenticity is mandatory. You can get wounded. You can get damaged. You can fall. But what matters is getting back up and carrying your wounds instead of hiding them. Because those wounds are part of your story. Lemmy's Rickenbacker proved that. A bullet hole didn't destroy an instrument. It made it legendary. In rock and roll history, there are many iconic instruments. Jimi Hendrix's Stratocaster, Eric Clapton's Gibson, Paul McCartney's Höfner. But none carry as powerful a story as Lemmy's Rickenbacker. Because that bass didn't just make music, it saved a life. And then it transformed that life into the world's loudest, most honest, most authentic music. Conclusion. The whole remains. The story lives. Lemmy Kilmister died on December 28, 2015. But the hole in the Rickenbacker is still there. On the bass displayed in the museum, on the left lower side, there's a small hole. The area around it is worn, the paint faded, but the hole is still open, because Lemmy never closed it. That hole wasn't just damage to him. It was a symbol of survival, resistance, never giving up. And today, when millions of people look at that hole, they remember Lemmy. They remember his music, his philosophy, his lifestyle. If you ever find yourself in a difficult situation, if life shoots at you, remember Lemmy's Rickenbacker. The bullet will come, you'll get damaged, but you'll survive. And those wounds won't make you weak, they'll make you strong. Because every wound is a story, and stories, like rock and roll, never die. Lemmy died, but the hole in the Rickenbacker lives on. And with it, Lemmy's legacy lives on. Never give up, never apologize, and carry your wounds with pride. Because you're a survivor, too. Just like Lemmy. Just like that holed bass.